Thunder cracked violently above the vast openness of the North York moors, sending echoes rumbling across the valleys like an angry giant roused from slumber. The sky was ink black, its darkness punctuated only by the angry flashes of lightning that illuminated rolling hills blanketed by thick heather and twisting trails. Rain whipped down mercilessly, slashing through the cold air like tiny shards of glass. "Ethan! Ethan Carter!" Grace's voice strained against the howling wind, sharp with desperation and raw panic. Her sturdy Wellington boots sank into the mud as she navigated the treacherous ground, eyes scanning frantically through the sheets of rain. The fence had broken, again, and now the sheep had scattered across the moors, vanishing into the swallowing storm. And her son, her boy, was somewhere out there, alone. "Ethan!" she shouted again, feeling the words ripped cruelly from her lips by the relentless wind. Only silence greeted her calls, punctuated by distant growls of thunder. Frustration clawed at her heart, but Grace pressed on, stumbling forward into the thickening mist, determined that nothing, not storm, nor fear, nor exhaustion, would keep her from finding him. Meanwhile, Ethan staggered through the dense heather, his small frame buffeted by the gale. His jacket was drenched and clung to him heavily, his blonde hair plastered flat against his forehead, water dripping into eyes wide with terror. He had just wanted to help, to prove he was old enough, strong enough to look after the flock. But the storm had come too fast, too furious. "Bess!" he called weakly, voice trembling. His faithful sheepdog had vanished moments before into the swirling fog, chasing after stray sheep, leaving him isolated in the relentless tempest. Ethan took a shaking step forward and winced as his foot twisted on a hidden root, sending him sprawling headlong into a muddy ditch. Pain shot up his ankle, sharp and immediate. He bit back a cry, tears of fear and frustration mingling with the rainwater streaming down his cheeks. I'm stuck," he whispered into the darkness, heart hammering wildly. Shadows danced around him, the shapes of the moors twisted grotesquely by the storm's wrath. Ethan felt desperately alone, trapped by his own mistake. And then, from the gloom, a bark, clear, strong, and fiercely loyal, split the night. "Bess!" Ethan gasped, hope surging within him. The border collie raced through the dense fog, ears back, eyes bright with determination. She skidded to a halt by Ethan's side, licking his face eagerly, reassuring him with her presence. Ethan buried his small fingers into her fur, holding tight. "You found me, girl," he murmured, feeling a tiny spark of warmth ignite in his chest, despite the chaos around them. Bess stood protectively, hackles raised, eyes alert. Yet the storm grew stronger still. The wind intensified, carrying the noise of branches cracking somewhere in the darkness. Ethan shivered violently, clinging desperately to Bess, his small voice rising again in fear. He needed his mom, needed safety, needed something, someone. And then, as if conjured by the child's desperate wishes, a piercing beam of torchlight cut through the curtain of rain and fog. Ethan froze, holding his breath. Who else was out here, lost in the storm? A tall figure emerged slowly from the gloom, shoulders broad, movements calm yet deliberate. Ethan felt Bess tense at his side, a low growl rumbling in her throat. "Easy, girl," a gruff voice spoke through the howling wind, firm yet gentle. The stranger raised the torch slightly, illuminating a weathered face etched deep with lines of hardship and experience. Dark eyes met Ethan's, assessing him carefully. "All right, lad. You're safe now," The man growled softly, extending a powerful hand to the frightened boy. Ethan hesitated, but the warmth and steadiness behind those rough features reassured him. He reached out, feeling the strong fingers wrap around his small wrist, pulling him up from the ditch with ease. "I got you," the stranger said simply, hoisting Ethan effortlessly into his arms. "Hold tight." "Best too?" Ethan whispered, voice thick with emotion. "Aye, best too," the man replied, a faint, fleeting smile tugging at the corner of his lips as the dog wagged her tail gratefully. Together they trudged through the brutal storm, Ethan clinging fiercely to the man's neck, Bess padding loyally by their side, paws squelching in the muddy ground. Every step was measured and careful, each taken as if defying the wild power around them. It felt like an eternity before the familiar silhouette of the Carter farmhouse appeared through the raging storm. Ethan exhaled shakily, relief washing over him. As they approached, Grace burst from the door, racing through the mud toward them, breath hitching with a fierce sob. "Ethan, thank God!" She grabbed her son, pulling him from the stranger's arms, crushing him to her chest. "Where have you been, you daft bugger?" she snapped, voice breaking. Ethan buried his face in her shoulder, sobbing quietly. The man stepped back into the shadows, seemingly uncomfortable in the raw emotion. Grace turned sharply, eyes narrowing at his silhouette through the storm. "Who are you?" she demanded. "Name's Lee," he grunted, avoiding her penetrating gaze. "I found the lad on the moors." "Thank you," Grace whispered, voice trembling slightly with gratitude and lingering suspicion. "Come inside, warm yourself." Lee shook his head abruptly, pulling his collar up against the cold rain. "Best I move on?" he muttered cryptically, backing away. Grace watched him vanish into the mist, her brow furrowing with confusion. Who was this enigmatic man, roaming the moors alone? Inside, the warmth of the cottage enveloped Ethan. He hugged Bess tight, grateful to have survived the harrowing night, unaware that beyond their cottage door, something far darker was beginning to stir. A shadow even more threatening than the storm that had nearly claimed him. In the darkness, a luxury Range Rover crawled slowly toward their farm, lights slicing harshly through the rain. Its occupant smiled coldly, preparing to bring his own kind of storm. Nigel Lawson had arrived. Inside the snug walls of their old stone cottage, Ethan huddled close to the fireplace, wrapped in a thick woolen blanket. Grace fussed around him, gently towel-drying his damp hair, her movements swift and purposeful, betraying her lingering anxiety. The warmth from the crackling logs seeped into Ethan's bones, chasing away the last remnants of the storm's chill. "You had me scared half to death, Ethan," Grace chided softly, her voice edged with relief rather than anger. "Never wander off like that again, hear me?" "I'm sorry, Mom," Ethan mumbled, eyes fixed sheepishly on the worn floorboards beneath his feet. "I just wanted to help, like Dad used to." Grace paused, the towel frozen momentarily in her hands. Her jaw tightened briefly, and she took a shaky breath before composing herself, brushing back a stray lock of damp hair from Ethan's forehead. "Your father would have wanted you safe, Ethan. That's all that matters to me." A sudden knock at the door shattered the moment, crisp and urgent. Grace stiffened instantly, instinctively protective. She moved quickly to the door, swinging it open with guarded eyes. The storm still lashed relentlessly outside, sending gusts of cold air and driving rain into the entryway. Standing there, drenched yet somehow immaculate, was Nigel Lawson. His tailored suit seemed utterly out of place against the raw simplicity of their home, Yet he smiled smoothly, unfazed by the elements battering around him. "Evening, Mrs. Carter," he greeted, his voice slick and measured, as though rehearsed carefully. "Bad night out there." "What do you want, Mr. Lawson?" Grace replied curtly, her eyes narrowed with suspicion, her tone leaving no room for friendly banter. "Just wanted to check you and your boy were all right," he said, a practiced air of concern coloring his voice as he peered inside the cottage. Ethan shrunk slightly under Lawson's sharp gaze. "Heard the lad got himself lost? Quite a scare, I imagine?" "We're fine," Grace answered shortly, blocking the doorway with her stance. Her patience was clearly wearing thin. "But something tells me that's not why you're really here." Lawson chuckled softly, his eyes narrowing briefly with calculated precision. "Direct and to the point, Mrs. Carter, I admire that. Indeed, I've come to discuss my proposal. Perhaps tonight's little misadventure underscores why my offer is so timely." He leaned closer, the intensity in his voice sharpening, a serpent hiding beneath layers of silk. "Sell the farm, Grace. This land has potential, and with my development plan, you'd never have to worry about these struggles again." Grace's eyes flashed dangerously. "This farm isn't just land, Lawson. It's our home. It's my family's legacy. It's not for sale." Lawson raised an eyebrow, clearly unfazed. "Everything has its price, Mrs. Carter, and trust me, I'll make sure yours is generous enough." She stepped back abruptly, slamming the door shut with finality. "Not interested," she called through the thick wooden barrier. Silence hung heavily for a heartbeat, broken only by the diminishing footsteps outside as Lawson retreated back into the storm. Grace exhaled shakily, leaning her forehead briefly against the cool wood. Her fists clenched tightly at her sides, feeling the weight of the farm's mounting debts like chains pulling her downward. The bank had been calling, debts from the failed ventures her husband had attempted before his passing, accumulating mercilessly. Lawson knew it. Of course he did. And he was counting on it. She turned to find Ethan watching her silently, eyes wide and questioning. "We're going to be all right, Ethan," she reassured him quietly, forcing strength into her voice. "We'll get through this." "But what if we don't, Mom?" Ethan whispered. The fear in his voice felt like a dagger twisting in her heart. "We always find a way, love," Grace said softly, kneeling beside him and cupping his small face gently in her hands. "This farm, this moor, it's in our blood. Nobody, not even men like Lawson, can take that from us." Outside, far beyond the warm walls of the Carter home, Lee Baxter trudged slowly through the driving rain back to his old caravan, the torchlight swaying gently in his grip. The weathered camper stood in stark relief against the raging storm, battered but unyielding, much like its occupant. Lee paused on the threshold, glancing back over the moors, the distant lights of Grace's cottage blinking faintly through the relentless downpour. Inside, the caravan smelled faintly of old leather and wood smoke, the space cluttered yet meticulously tidy, a lifetime's worth of possessions crammed into shelves and corners. Lee peeled off his wet coat, hanging it carefully by the narrow door. His eyes lingered on an old photograph pinned to the wall. A younger Lee, uniform crisp and medals shining, a horse at his side. Memories surged, bitter and sharp, and he forced them away with practiced discipline. He poured himself a stiff measure of whiskey, savoring the burn as it chased away the night's chill. Lee knew Grace Carter, knew her strength, her stubborn pride. Yet he also knew Lawson's type, the ruthless kind that didn't give up easily, the kind that saw everything and everyone as nothing but assets to exploit. The sound of distant engines disrupted his brooding. Lee peered through the grimy window to see headlights bobbing along the moorland track toward the village pub. Tommy Harrison's gang, the Moors Bikers, was on the move tonight. Lee knew Tommy, respected his grit and loyalty, even if their paths rarely crossed these days. Curiosity tugged at him, stirring something inside Lee he'd long believed dormant. Lawson's presence on the moors felt like a match poised near dry tinder, ready to ignite the whole community into flames. Something whispered within him, a sense of impending danger that he recognized from his military past. Meanwhile, back at the Carter cottage, Grace tucked Ethan into his bed, smoothing the covers with gentle care. "Sleep now, love," she whispered, kissing his forehead tenderly. "Everything'll look better in the morning." Yet, she lingered at the window afterward, eyes searching through the storm, feeling the world around her shifting dangerously. Her thoughts drifted to the mysterious stranger who had saved her son. Lee Baxter. There was something both unsettling and oddly reassuring about him. And then, over the howling wind, she heard the distant growl of motorcycles, defiant and powerful, echoing across the moors like an anthem of resistance. Grace straightened her shoulders, determination rekindled. Whatever storm was coming next, whether brought by nature or Nigel Lawson, she'd be ready to face it. This was her home, her fight, and she wouldn't back down easily. Not tonight, not ever. Sunrise broke slowly over the North York moors, chasing away the lingering shadows of the storm. Mist curled softly across the heather-cloaked hills, tendrils of white gently touching the damp grass. Dew glistened like tiny crystals, sparkling beneath the first rays of dawn. For a moment, the chaos of the previous night seemed almost forgotten, though the tension still hung quietly beneath the peaceful surface. Grace stepped out of the cottage into the crisp morning air, taking in the familiar sight before her. A cup of strong Yorkshire tea warmed her hands as she stood on the porch, savoring the momentary tranquility. She could see the sheep scattered across the pasture, their white coats bright against the dark green of the landscape, bleating softly as they grazed. The farm was more than land. It was her history, her blood, her sweat, her tears. It had stood through generations of Carters, through storms far worse than the one that had battered the night before. She wouldn't be the Carter who let it all fall apart. Her chin tilted defiantly against the quiet morning breeze. Ethan appeared in the doorway, still rubbing sleep from his eyes, followed faithfully by Bess. "Can I help you today, Mom?" he asked softly, a note of determination entering his small voice. She smiled warmly, tousling his messy blonde hair. "Of course, love. I reckon it's time you learn the old ways properly." They walked together toward the pasture, Bess trotting ahead. Grace patiently taught Ethan how to whistle sharply and direct the sheepdog with crisp commands. His first attempts were clumsy, the sheep scattering rather than obeying, but gradually he gained confidence, encouraged by Grace's patient instructions and Bess's eager responsiveness. "You're getting the hang of it," she praised gently as he finally managed to herd a small group successfully. Ethan beamed, pride brightening his face. The morning passed peacefully, the two working side by side, Grace sharing stories about his father's own childhood on these same hills. Ethan listened attentively, soaking in every detail, every anecdote adding to his sense of belonging. Yet beneath the gentle routine, worry gnawed at Grace's heart. Lawson's looming threat was ever present, a shadow cast darkly over their simple life. She had to find a way, had to hold on, but how? Meanwhile, Ethan's curiosity about the enigmatic Lee Baxter had only grown overnight. After lunch, as Grace busied herself mending fences damaged by the storm, Ethan quietly slipped away across the fields, heart thumping with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. He knew where Lee's old caravan stood, tucked away in a secluded hollow just past the ridge. Approaching cautiously, Ethan paused at the edge of the clearing. The caravan was humble, paint chipped and faded, a tiny plume of smoke drifting lazily from the rusted chimney pipe. Summoning his courage, Ethan stepped closer. "Hello?" he called timidly, eyes wide with curiosity. The door creaked open, and Lee appeared in the doorway, arms folded across his broad chest, face impassive. For a long moment he said nothing, studying Ethan thoughtfully. "You're the Carter lad," Lee finally said, gruff but not unkind. "You lost again?" Ethan shook his head quickly. "No, sir. I wanted to thank you for last night and ask you, well, what are you doing out here all alone?" Lee's eyebrows knitted slightly, a flicker of amusement in his dark eyes. He motioned silently for Ethan to come closer, stepping aside to let him into the caravan. Inside, the space was compact but neat, filled with remnants of Lee's past. Worn military uniforms, faded photographs, dusty medals hung solemnly along the wall. Ethan's eyes grew large with awe as he moved from one treasure to the next, drinking in the echoes of a history he could hardly fathom. "You were a soldier?" Ethan breathed, gaze fixed reverently on a faded photograph of a younger Lee, standing proudly beside a magnificent horse, medals gleaming on his chest. "Marine," Lee corrected quietly, his voice distant. "And that horse, he was my partner, served beside me through thick and thin. Lost more than I won, though." The sadness in Lee's tone made Ethan hesitate, sensing he'd touched upon a painful memory. "Did you lose him?" he asked softly. Lee sighed, a heavy sound filled with grief. "In war, lad, you lose many things. He was one of them." Ethan's heart twisted with sympathy, sensing the quiet storm of emotions beneath Lee's tough exterior. "You could always come help us at the farm," he suggested shyly. "Mom would appreciate it." Lee chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Your mom's got plenty to handle without worrying about the likes of me, lad." Suddenly, the distant rumble of machinery interrupted their conversation. Ethan glanced toward the window, frowning. "What's that?" Lee's face hardened, expression darkening immediately. "Trouble." Together they emerged from the caravan, stepping quickly toward the ridgeline that overlooked the neighboring fields. Ethan's heart sank at what he saw below. Heavy construction equipment slowly rolling onto the neighboring land. Workers in bright yellow jackets milling around, marking spots for excavation. Lawson's ecotourism project had officially begun. From across the pasture, Ethan heard his mother's sharp voice rise, calling his name urgently. "Ethan!" He turned guiltily, realizing she'd discovered his absence. Grace stood at the edge of their field, eyes narrowed as she spotted him beside Lee. Ethan waved sheepishly, hurrying back toward her. "I told you not to wander off," she scolded, gripping his shoulder firmly. Her gaze softened slightly as she turned toward Lee, recognizing his silent presence. "Thank you again. For yesterday." Lee inclined his head quietly, his eyes meeting Grace's in a brief, meaningful glance. "Careful out there," he warned gently, nodding toward the machinery. "Lawson's people don't play fair." Grace's jaw tightened resolutely. "Neither do I. Not when it comes to my home." Back inside their cottage, a letter lay waiting ominously on the kitchen table. Grace opened it, hands trembling slightly, Her breath caught painfully in her chest as she read Lawson's latest blow. He'd successfully purchased the adjoining fields, and construction would commence immediately. She closed her eyes tightly, feeling the fight within her begin to flare even stronger. The roots of her life here ran deeper than Lawson realized, woven into the moors, solid and unbreakable. Lawson might have money, might have power, but he underestimated the grit and determination of Grace Carter. Outside, Ethan watched the machinery rolling forward, a cold dread pooling in his stomach. Beside him, Bess growled softly, sensing the threat to their world. The calm was fading rapidly, and soon the real storm would break loose once more. Grace's hand trembled slightly as she set down Lawson's ominous letter, her jaw clenched tight. Ethan watched silently from across the worn oak kitchen table, eyes wide with concern, his young face etched with confusion. She forced a gentle smile, masking the turmoil roiling beneath her surface, determined to shield her boy from adult fears that threaten their very existence. "It's nothing to fret about, love," she reassured softly, smoothing the crease in the paper absently. "We'll find a way through this. We always do." Ethan nodded quietly, absorbing the brave determination in his mother's voice, though not fully convinced. As Grace turned away toward the stove, he slipped from his seat, padding silently to the window. His gaze settled on the heavy equipment now parked conspicuously close to their border, an ugly intrusion on their once peaceful landscape. Lawson's sleek figure stood starkly out among his workers, directing the operation with confident arrogance. Ethan's small hands curled into tight fists, frustration pulsing through him. He glanced at Bess, who lay quietly beside him, her ears perked, sensing his tension. He knelt down, scratching behind her ears, comforted by her steady presence. Across the moors, Dr. Rachel Evans had spent the early hours poring over her meticulous notes. Her workspace, cluttered with thick binders, research papers, and scattered coffee mugs, spoke to her tireless devotion to understanding and protecting the fragile ecology of the moors. She pushed her glasses higher onto the bridge of her nose, sighing softly. The data before her was clear and deeply troubling. Lawson's supposedly eco-friendly development was anything but. Gathering the damning evidence in hand, Rachel knew what needed doing. Without hesitation, she left her cozy cottage, boots crunching along the gravel road as she made her way quickly toward the Carter farm. The community needed to know the truth, needed to stand together against Lawson's hidden agenda. When Rachel arrived at Grace's cottage, she knocked urgently, hearing the muffled shuffle of footsteps approaching inside. Grace opened the door, her weary expression quickly giving way to surprise at Rachel's determined presence. "Rachel? Everything all right?" The veterinarian stepped inside, gently removing her raincoat, her expression grim. "Grace, we need to talk. It's about Lawson's project. He's lying badly." They gathered at the kitchen table, Rachel spreading out her documents clearly. Ethan watched from a distance, his curious eyes peeking over the edge of the counter as Bess leaned against his leg protectively. Rachel pointed emphatically at a graph, her voice tight with barely restrained anger. "This is what Lawson claims his eco-project will do. He talks about environmental protection, wetland conservation, native species preservation. But it's all a smokescreen. His plans call for draining key wetlands, and that would devastate local wildlife populations, including the rare moorland sheep I've been studying." Grace's fists tightened on the edge of the table. Her gaze darkened, fury simmering beneath the surface. "So he's lied straight to our faces?" Rachel nodded solemnly. Absolutely. He banks on the fact no one will read the fine print. These species won't survive his project. It's not ecotourism. It's greed, pure and simple. From behind them, a low, thoughtful voice broke into their conversation. Sounds like the kind of stunt I'd expect. They turned in unison, startled. Lee Baxter stood silently at the doorway, expression grim, his rugged face drawn tight with disapproval. Ethan brightened slightly at his appearance, stepping forward shyly. "Lee," Grace acknowledged cautiously, a hint of gratitude in her voice. "Didn't see you come in." Lee nodded quietly, approaching the table, glancing briefly at Rachel's documents. "I've seen Lawson's men out there. Surveyors poking around, machinery tearing into untouched ground. They don't care about preserving the moors. He's got some muscle hired, too. Tough guys, meant to intimidate." A tense silence fell across the room, each contemplating the harsh reality confronting them. "Then it's high time we do something," Grace declared firmly. "We need to rally the village. Lawson's counting on us to roll over, but he's underestimated what we're made of." Across town, nestled in the heart of the village, stood the local pub, the center of community life. Tonight, its usually bustling atmosphere was tense and charged, filled with grumbled conversations and worried frowns. Tommy Harrison sat at a corner table surrounded by the members of his motorcycle club, the Moors Bikers, voices low and fierce. "Lawson's a right snake," Tommy growled, slamming his pint onto the table with a loud clunk. "He wants our hills, thinks he can just waltz in, flash his money, and take whatever he wants." His fellow bikers murmured in agreement, anger burning in their rugged faces. The door opened suddenly, drawing attention, and silence fell as Grace stepped into the pub, followed closely by Lee and Rachel. The atmosphere thickened immediately, tension palpable. Tommy raised an eyebrow, surprised but intrigued. "Grace Carter, this is unexpected." She moved confidently to the center of the pub, addressing the gathered villagers with a firm, clear voice. "Nigel Lawson's lied to us. His fancy eco-development is a fraud, a front for destroying our land, draining our wetlands, killing wildlife, and ruining our way of life." A murmur of disbelief rippled through the crowd. She nodded toward Rachel, who quickly stepped forward, presenting the evidence she had meticulously gathered. The villagers crowded around, examining the documents, anger and disbelief building steadily. Grace looked directly at Tommy, her voice strong and challenging. "This fight affects us all. It'll take all of us to stop Lawson. Tommy, we need the bikers behind us." Tommy studied her intently, reading the steel determination etched deep in her eyes. Slowly, deliberately, he nodded. "We're in, Grace. Nobody messes with our home. Not without a fight." A wave of approval surged through the villagers, the resolve evident on every face. For the first time in days, Grace felt a surge of genuine hope. Meanwhile, back at the farm, Ethan sat quietly beside the fire, stroking Bess gently. He gazed thoughtfully into the dancing flames, feeling small yet somehow powerful. He'd heard the adults' words, understood the stakes. "We have to help them, Bess," he whispered firmly to the dog, whose eyes watched him loyally. "It's up to us, too." Outside, the rumble of motorcycles filled the evening air, a symbol of unity, resilience, and a promise of action. Lawson had ignited a storm he couldn't control, and now the community was rising to fight back. The gathering storm was ready to break, and Ethan knew that soon the Moors would bear witness to a battle for their very soul. Dawn broke fiercely over the moors, a sharp contrast to the uneasy peace of the previous evening. Morning sunlight sliced through a blanket of low-hanging fog, casting long, dramatic shadows across the fields and pastures. Grace stood quietly outside the farmhouse, arms crossed, scanning the distant machinery that threatened the land she loved deeply. Her eyes narrowed as she watched the crews maneuvering heavy equipment, their metallic claws ready to rip through untouched earth. Beside her, Lee leaned casually against the fence post, sipping black coffee from a chipped ceramic mug. He'd arrived at first light, offering quiet support without fuss. His rugged features hardened in the morning light, a silent intensity radiating from him. Lawson's people move quick, he murmured darkly, watching as bulldozers and trucks rumbled ominously closer. Grace exhaled slowly, steeling herself. Then we'll need to move quicker. The sharp bark of engines drew their attention behind them. Across the moors, Tommy and his bikers roared into view, a defiant caravan of leather jackets and revving motors. The riders stopped in front of the Carter farm in a cloud of dust, their faces serious and determined. Tommy swung off his bike, removing his helmet as he approached Grace with purposeful strides. "We're ready," Tommy announced bluntly. His voice was gruff, eyes narrowed with simmering anger. "My lads won't stand by and watch these parasites destroy our hills." Grace nodded gratefully, extending a hand to shake Tommy's firmly. "We need eyes everywhere. Lawson won't wait, and neither can we. Keep an eye out and make sure they understand. We're not backing down." Tommy nodded, a fierce smile playing at his lips. "Got it. We'll make sure they know whose land they're messing with." The bikers quickly dispersed, engines revving as they took off toward the machinery, and workers poised at the borders of their land. Grace felt a swell of pride watching them ride out, her community, standing firm in defense of the moors. Ethan emerged quietly from the cottage, eyes wide with apprehension and excitement. "Mom, can I help too?" Grace hesitated briefly, torn between protection and encouragement. But she saw the fierce determination mirrored in his small face, the same courage his father had always possessed. Kneeling down, she took his shoulders gently, meeting his eyes seriously. "Ethan, I need you and Bess to keep watch on the sheep. They're frightened from the noise, and it's your job to reassure them. Can you do that?" Ethan squared his small shoulders, nodding eagerly. "I'll do my best, Mom." He turned, calling to Bess, who trotted faithfully at his heels. Grace watched them head toward the fields, her heart tight with pride and worry. Suddenly, shouts echoed from the boundary of their land. Grace and Lee turned sharply, sprinting forward to investigate. They reached the edge of the pasture just as Tommy confronted Lawson's hired workers, their vehicles parked aggressively at the broken fence line. One of the men was already cutting through barbed wire, his movements rough and unapologetic. "Stop right there!" Tommy barked, stepping forward boldly, his jaw set tight. The worker sneered, raising bolt cutters defiantly. "This is private land. Get back, or else..." "Or else what?" Tommy growled, closing the distance instantly, his fists clenched tightly. A tense moment passed, charged and volatile. Then, without hesitation, Tommy swung his fist, landing a solid punch on the worker's jaw. The man stumbled backward, dropping the cutters into the grass with a sharp clang. Instantly, a scuffle broke out. Workers lunging forward, bikers moving swiftly to defend their territory. The field erupted into chaos, shouts and curses ringing through the crisp morning air. Lee surged forward, moving with the calculated precision of a soldier, grabbing one of Lawson's men who swung at Tommy from behind. Lee twisted the attacker's arm expertly, throwing him roughly aside. His calm yet fierce manner commanded immediate respect from friend and foe alike. "Stay off our land," Lee growled menacingly, eyes blazing as he positioned himself protectively in front of Grace. His tone brooked no argument, steady and threatening. The workers hesitated, suddenly unsure. Then, deciding it wasn't worth the risk, they retreated hastily, cursing and grumbling bitterly as they returned to their vehicles, tires churning mud and grass as they fled. Grace breathed heavily, adrenaline pulsing fiercely through her veins. Lee glanced at her, concern flickering briefly across his hard features. "You all right?" he asked quietly. She nodded quickly, determination hardening once more. "They're gone for now, but Lawson won't take this lying down." Her prediction proved accurate swiftly. Within hours, a formal legal notice arrived, served coldly by a bored-looking courier. Grace read it silently, heart sinking. Lawson was suing them for trespassing on property he claimed to have bought legally. And as if that wasn't enough, moments later, her phone buzzed ominously. It was the bank, another merciless reminder of their precarious financial situation. "We've run out of patience, Mrs. Carter," the clipped voice on the other end warned bluntly. "Unless you can settle your debts promptly, the farm will be repossessed." Grace clenched her jaw tightly, ending the call abruptly and fighting back tears of anger and helplessness. Lawson was tightening the noose with cold precision. She slammed her fist into the table, feeling utterly trapped. "He's strangling us," she hissed bitterly, eyes blazing. Lee placed a firm hand on her shoulder, grounding her. "We fight smarter, not harder," he reminded calmly. "Lawson has weaknesses, everyone does. We find them, exploit them." Grace drew a steadying breath, regaining composure. Rachel hurried into the kitchen, documents in hand, determination etched clearly across her face. "I found discrepancies in Lawson's permits. Signatures forged, dates altered, enough evidence to challenge his plans legally." Lee nodded approvingly. "Good. We hit him where it counts. His reputation." Tommy joined them, arms crossed sternly. "Then let's gather the evidence and hit him hard. Show everyone exactly what Lawson's about." Grace straightened resolutely, her voice steady and fierce. "We'll do whatever it takes. This isn't just a fight for land. It's about protecting our way of life. Lawson picked the wrong people to mess with." The group stood together, a formidable coalition bound by common purpose. Ethan watched silently from the doorway, sensing the weight of the moment. He wrapped an arm around Bess, whispering softly to the loyal dog. "We're gonna win, Bess," he murmured firmly. "We have to." As daylight stretched across the moors, the lines were clearly drawn. The fight had begun, raw, fierce, and unmistakably real. For Grace and her allies, this battle was personal, the stakes high and undeniable. They would protect the moors, their community, and their future, whatever the cost. The next morning, Ethan woke to the sharp sound of frantic barking outside his window. Blinking away sleep, he sprang up, heart racing with sudden alertness. Bess never barked unless something was wrong. Ethan threw on his clothes hurriedly and bolted downstairs, bursting through the front door onto the porch. He was greeted by a scene of utter chaos. Several sheep lay still in the grass, their bodies oddly motionless, the rest of the flock bleating in distress, wandering in circles. Bess darted anxiously between them, her ears pinned back, barking urgently. Grace ran over from the barn, her face pale and stricken. Kneeling beside one sheep, she gently lifted its head, tears springing into her eyes. "Poison," she whispered hoarsely, her voice thick with grief and rage. "Poison?" Ethan gasped, fear clutching his chest painfully. She nodded grimly, her fists clenched tightly. Someone sabotaged their feed. Ethan's small face hardened, fury welling up inside him. "Lawson," he whispered, eyes narrowing with a sudden fierce anger. "He's trying to drive us out." From the edge of the driveway, Lee approached rapidly, his jaw clenched with tension. He'd seen sabotage before, recognized the signs immediately. Kneeling swiftly beside Grace, he examined the fallen sheep, shaking his head bitterly. "Classic intimidation tactics," he muttered darkly. "Lawson's desperate, getting sloppy." Suddenly Bess barked sharply, her attention riveted on a distant figure racing across the lower pasture toward a white van parked partially hidden behind a clump of trees. Ethan squinted, recognition and urgency igniting in him at once. "That's him! Mom, Lee, that's the man who cut our fences!" Ethan shouted, pointing frantically. Without hesitating, Ethan broke into a sprint, Bess racing alongside him, barking loudly. Grace called after him urgently, but Ethan was too driven by adrenaline and anger to listen. The van started its engine abruptly, tires spinning in the dirt, attempting to flee. Ethan and Bess rushed faster, chasing it with every ounce of strength they could muster. Lee reacted instantly, leaping onto Tommy's motorbike parked nearby, firing it up and racing after Ethan and Bess. Tommy and Grace hurriedly followed in Tommy's battered pickup, tires bouncing over rough terrain, determination etched on their faces. Ahead, Ethan pumped his small legs furiously, shouting commands to Bess, who lunged fearlessly toward the van, biting at the tires, growling fiercely. Ethan stumbled, falling to his knees in the damp grass, breathing heavily, frustration surging through him. "Go, Bess! Stop them!" Lee roared past Ethan, engine growling like thunder, quickly overtaking the fleeing van. With practiced ease, he maneuvered the motorbike sharply ahead, forcing the van to skid sideways, sliding to a halt mere feet from Lee's steady glare. The driver scrambled from the cab, clearly panicked, before the thug could flee into the brush. Tommy's truck skidded to a stop beside him, and Grace leapt out, immediately confronting the man, her voice sharp and furious. "Who sent you? Lawson?" The man, caught off guard and trembling with fear and confusion, attempted weak denial, his eyes darting nervously between Lee's intimidating presence and Tommy's furious glare. Lee advanced calmly but menacingly, speaking softly with quiet threat. "This is your only chance. Tell us everything now, or face far worse later." The thug hesitated, eyes flicking between Grace and Lee, the pressure overwhelming. He finally blurted, voice shaking with panic. "Lawson hired me, all right? He's been paying to sabotage your farm, poison your sheep. He wants you desperate, wants you off the land. It's all part of his scam. He's faking those eco-credentials, cooking the books to dodge taxes." Grace's breath caught sharply, anger boiling hotly within her. "That lying snake," she hissed bitterly. From the main road came the sudden wail of police sirens. Inspector Sarah Patel's familiar cruiser barreled toward them, skidding expertly to a halt nearby, lights flashing brightly in the early morning gloom. She exited swiftly, expression stern and authoritative. "What in the world is going on here?" she demanded, eyes narrowing suspiciously as she took in the van, the frightened thug, and the tense scene. Grace stepped forward urgently, gesturing sharply toward the captured saboteur. "Inspector, we've caught one of Lawson's hired thugs poisoning our livestock and damaging our property." Inspector Patel eyed the trembling man critically. "Serious accusations require solid proof, Grace. Vigilante actions won't hold up legally." Frustration surged through Grace. What else do you need, Sarah? Lawson's behind this. His fingerprints are everywhere. Inspector Patel shook her head firmly. You know I want to help, Grace, but I need hard evidence, documented proof, not street justice. Suddenly, Rachel's battered Land Rover roared up the driveway, skidding to an abrupt halt, gravel flying wildly. She leapt from the vehicle, papers waving triumphantly. I found it! Rachel shouted breathlessly, running toward the group. Definitive proof! Lawson forged signatures and falsified permits. His entire project's a fraud. Grace breathed out shakily, relief and determination mingling fiercely. She looked squarely at Inspector Patel, eyes blazing. There's your proof. Inspector Patel accepted the documents from Rachel, flipping through the pages swiftly, eyes narrowing. Finally, she nodded decisively. This changes things. I'll bring Lawson in immediately. But next time, no chasing suspects through fields. Call me first. The captured thug was quickly cuffed and loaded into the cruiser, his shoulders sagging in resignation. Ethan stood quietly beside his mother, hand resting gently on Bess's head, the border collie panting softly from the chase. Lee stepped close, expression calm and reassuring. You did good, Ethan, Lee murmured quietly. Brave lad. Grace wrapped an arm protectively around her son's shoulders, pride warming her heart amidst the chaos. You scared me half to death, Ethan, but I'm proud of you. Standing up for what's ours, just like your father. Tommy and Rachel joined them, forming a quiet circle of resilience. Tommy nodded firmly. Lawson underestimated our community. He's pushed too far. He won't get away with this. Grace glanced across the moors, toward Lawson's distant luxury office in town. Her voice trembled with fierce resolve. It's time to confront him directly. No more hiding behind his lawyers and hired thugs. Lee nodded solemnly, eyes fixed on the horizon. Agreed. It's past time Lawson learned what happens when he threatens honest people. The morning air crackled with fresh resolve. They stood together, allies forged by hardship and united purpose, ready for the decisive fight ahead. Lawson had struck recklessly, believing himself untouchable. But now, the tables were turning fast. The chase had ended, but the battle for the moors was just beginning. The late afternoon sun slanted through the windows of Nigel Lawson's glossy downtown office, casting elongated shadows across polished mahogany furniture. From his vantage point at the sprawling, tidy desk, Lawson gazed smugly over blueprints and charts, his plans meticulously arranged, ambitious and seemingly unstoppable. He allowed himself a satisfied smile, savoring the illusion of imminent victory. A sudden, sharp rap at the heavy office door interrupted his thoughts. Before Lawson could respond, the door swung open sharply, revealing Grace Carter, her expression steely with resolve, fury smoldering in her unwavering gaze. Behind her, Lee stood silently, his presence solid, protective, like an immovable wall. Lawson's smile faltered slightly at the unexpected intrusion, irritation flickering briefly in his eyes before he masked it with practiced charm. Mrs. Carter, what an unexpected surprise, he remarked smoothly, leaning back leisurely in his chair. To what do I owe the pleasure? Grace didn't hesitate, striding directly to his desk and slamming down a thick file folder, its sharp sound reverberating ominously in the elegant office. The confident smirk slid quickly from Lawson's face, replaced by wary suspicion. You're done, Lawson, Grace declared bluntly, her voice taut with barely contained rage. We've got your entire scam documented. Falsified permits, forged signatures, illegal activities. You're not building your precious eco-resort. You're going to jail. Lawson's expression tightened instantly, eyes narrowing dangerously. He slowly leaned forward, fingers steepled carefully beneath his chin, attempting calm control despite his sudden alarm. Mrs. Carter, I suggest caution. Accusations like these carry serious consequences. Lee stepped forward, eyes like cold steel. Exactly, he growled softly, especially when they're true. Lawson chuckled bitterly, feigning amusement even as his confidence faltered beneath their combined pressure. You really think a couple of dusty country nobodies can topple me? Please. I'm bringing opportunity and progress to these forgotten hills. You should be thanking me. Grace stood firm, her eyes locked defiantly on Lawson's. You're poisoning our land, our livestock, threatening our homes, and now we have proof. Your opportunity ends here. The tense standoff was suddenly interrupted by a sharp, official knock at the door. Without waiting for a response, Inspector Sarah Patel stepped briskly into the office, flanked by two uniformed officers. Lawson's carefully maintained mask finally slipped completely, his face paling slightly beneath his calm facade. Inspector? He began with strained politeness, quickly rising to greet her. This is all a misunderstanding. These people have no... Inspector Patel raised a silencing hand, cutting through his excuses with authoritative ease. Save your explanations for the station, Mr. Lawson. We have ample evidence and multiple witnesses to your criminal acts. Lawson's eyes flicked angrily toward Grace. Resentment and disbelief etched deeply in his features. You can't be serious, he sneered. You're going to take the word of some moor dwellers over mine? This is absurd. Patel remained unmoved, stepping forward calmly, voice firm and clear. Nigel Lawson, you're under arrest for fraud, forgery, animal cruelty, and destruction of protected lands. Anything you say can and will be used against you. Lawson sputtered protests as the officers approached swiftly, expertly cuffing his wrists behind his back. His voice rose with fury, echoing through the elegant office, now tainted forever by scandal and humiliation. Outside, gathered along the sidewalks, a throng of villagers and local reporters waited eagerly, drawn by rumors of Lawson's downfall. Cameras flashed brightly as Lawson emerged, escorted firmly by Inspector Patel and her officers. The crowd erupted into cheers, their shouts of triumph ringing clearly through the streets. Tommy Harrison and his bikers stood proudly at the front, their presence strong and resolute, voices loud and defiant as they chanted, "Save our moors! Protect our home!" The sense of collective victory rippled powerfully through the gathered residents. People who'd long felt powerless against money and influence, now witnessing justice prevail firsthand. Grace stepped forward quietly, standing beside Tommy, Lee, and Rachel, shoulders squared with quiet pride. She reached out gently, taking Ethan's hand, holding tight. "We did it, love," she whispered softly, tears of fierce satisfaction glistening in her eyes. "We stood strong." Ethan nodded solemnly, pride swelling in his small chest. "We protected our home, Mom." Rachel smiled warmly, her eyes bright with emotion. "This is just the beginning. We need to use this momentum. Protecting the moors long-term means awareness and conservation. We can launch something meaningful, a sheep conservation fund. The village will support it. The pub already promised proceeds." Tommy nodded firmly, grinning broadly. "Count us in. This is our land, our community." Lee quietly stepped closer to Grace, his voice low, thoughtful. "You've inspired them all, Grace. Your courage and heart rallied the village. Your husband would be proud." Grace felt her throat tighten painfully with emotion, and she squeezed Ethan's hand, drawing quiet strength from her son's unwavering gaze. "This victory belongs to all of us," she said, voice shaking softly but determinedly. "Every single person here. It's proof that community matters, especially when we stand united." Across the square, Inspector Patel secured Lawson into her cruiser, the doors shutting firmly, cutting off his enraged protests. She caught Grace's eye and nodded respectfully, a silent acknowledgement of bravery, justice, and truth. Grace took a deep breath, allowing herself, just for a moment, to savor their hard-earned triumph. Yet beneath the pride, she understood that the fight for their home and the moors' future wasn't over, not entirely. The threats posed by greed and selfish ambition would always linger, lurking quietly in wait. The community had won this round, but vigilance would forever remain necessary. Beside her, Ethan gently tugged her hand. "Mom, what happens now?" She smiled warmly, squeezing his hand firmly. "Now we rebuild, stronger than before." The villagers dispersed slowly, buoyed by the warmth of victory and unity, leaving the square quiet and peaceful beneath the gathering twilight. As Grace and Ethan walked slowly homeward along the winding moorland road, Lee fell into step quietly beside them, a reassuring, silent guardian. They'd weathered a fierce storm together, forged a deep bond through hardship and perseverance. In the quiet calm settling once more over the moors, Grace felt a quiet pride. Together, they had faced the reckoning, stood their ground, protected their legacy, and won. They were ordinary people, bound together by shared strength, loyalty, and love for the land beneath their feet. And in the end, that had been enough. As dawn broke gently over the North York moors, the silence was different, a softer, more peaceful hush enveloping the land. Gone was the tense, fearful quiet of the past weeks. In its place settled a tranquil calmness, profound and reassuring. Morning sunlight stretched golden across fields of heather, and birdsong echoed lightly across pastures still glistening with dew. At the Carter farm, Grace stood at the edge of her fields, sipping her tea slowly, savoring the momentary peace. Her gaze traveled over the hills, to the pastures dotted with grazing sheep, Bess trotting attentively beside Ethan as he checked carefully on each animal. The boy moved with newfound confidence, a quiet maturity born of hardship and triumph. Grace felt her heart swell with a gentle pride, watching him grow into someone his father would have admired deeply. Ethan glanced up and caught her watching, smiling brightly, waving energetically before returning carefully to his chores. Grace smiled back, feeling warmth spread through her heart. Behind her, footsteps crunched softly along the gravel path. Lee approached quietly, his gaze also fixed thoughtfully on Ethan and Bess. "He's a good lad," Lee observed simply, his deep voice calm and thoughtful. "He is," Grace agreed warmly. She turned to face Lee, noticing the slight relaxation in his stance, a hint of peace that hadn't been there before. "It's good to see him smiling again. Feels like it's been a long time." Lee nodded slowly, gaze drifting contemplatively across the horizon. "Victory's bittersweet. You've protected your home, but nothing's ever truly over, is it?" Grace exhaled softly, eyes serious but accepting. "No, but I guess that's what makes it meaningful, knowing that protecting what matters most is a lifelong battle." Lee's eyes shifted thoughtfully, a faint smile curving the corners of his mouth. "Perhaps that's why it matters so much in the first place." He turned slowly, gesturing toward the old caravan he'd long called home, parked carefully at the edge of their property. "I've been thinking of moving that old thing closer, maybe fix it up proper. Even thought of starting a riding school, teach kids how to handle horses. Give something back, something useful." Grace studied him quietly, understanding dawning clearly on her features. "You'd stay here? Be part of this community?" Lee hesitated briefly, his usual quiet confidence flickering briefly with vulnerability. "If you'd have me," he said gruffly, a soft hope hidden beneath his rough exterior. Grace smiled gently, her eyes warm. "Of course we would. You've earned your place here, Lee. You're family now." Nearby, Ethan had wandered closer, overhearing the conversation. His eyes brightened excitedly. "You mean you'll live here with us, Lee? Really?" Lee chuckled quietly, ruffling Ethan's hair affectionately. "Looks that way, lad." Ethan grinned joyfully, exchanging an enthusiastic glance with Bess, who wagged her tail energetically in approval. Grace felt laughter bubble up gently in her chest, happiness finally settling deep into her bones. Across the village, more signs of new beginnings stirred quietly. Tommy Harrison and the Moors bikers had embraced their newfound responsibility as protectors and community leaders. Regular patrols around the moors became commonplace, the bikers proudly safeguarding the natural beauty they'd fought so fiercely to defend. Inside the village pub, which had transformed into the heart of local activism, Tommy held lively meetings with villagers and conservationists alike. Rachel Evans had stepped naturally into a guiding role, spearheading the newly established Moorland Sheep Conservation Fund. Donations poured in steadily, funds raised by pub proceeds and community events ensuring the continued protection and care of the moorland's wildlife. Inspector Sarah Patel had become a familiar and welcomed face around town, maintaining vigilant watchfulness to ensure no one like Lawson would threaten their peace again. The community had grown stronger through adversity, bound by shared purpose, trust, and respect. Back at the farm, life slowly regained a rhythm of gentle simplicity. Ethan eagerly learned more every day about caring for their animals, guided patiently by Grace and supported quietly by Lee's reassuring presence. The scars from their recent struggles remained, reminders of battles fought and won, but healing began slowly, unmistakably. One quiet afternoon, Lee and Ethan worked together repairing fences, Lee patiently instructing the young boy how to hammer nails carefully, how to reinforce weakened sections. Ethan absorbed each lesson seriously, determined to prove himself capable. "You're a natural, Ethan," Lee praised warmly. "You'll make a fine farmer one day." Ethan straightened proudly, his small face glowing with pride. "I'm going to protect this farm forever, Lee, just like you and Mom." Lee squeezed his shoulder firmly, deeply moved. "I know you will, lad. You've got the strength of your mother and the heart of your father." Later, as sunset bathed the moors in rich, vibrant hues of purple and orange, Grace wandered slowly to the highest ridge, gazing out thoughtfully across the vast landscape. The silence was deep, profound, touched lightly by evening breeze rustling gently through the grass. She heard quiet footsteps approaching, knowing without looking it was Lee. He stood beside her silently, sharing the quiet, reflective moment. "This land changes you," she said softly, eyes shining with emotion. "It tests you, strengthens you. It's homely, beautiful, harsh, but ours." He nodded quietly, understanding deeply. "I've seen a lot of places, faced a lot of darkness, but nowhere ever felt like home until here." Grace exhaled slowly, smiling softly. Then welcome home, Lee Baxter. As twilight fell slowly over the moors, they walked silently back toward the farm, feeling profoundly connected to the land, to their community, and to each other. Bess trotted ahead, Ethan calling cheerfully from the porch, the warm glow from the cottage windows beckoning them gently home. The storms they'd faced had shaken them deeply, challenged their courage and strength. Yet they'd emerged stronger, together, bound deeply by loyalty, resilience, and unwavering love for their home. As Grace stepped onto her porch, looking quietly over the land bathed softly in moonlight, she knew challenges would always return, new threats, different faces, yet they'd always be ready, standing firm, protecting their heritage, their legacy. After the dust settled, life began anew, richer, deeper, and filled unmistakably with purpose and quiet hope. In the gentle quiet of early morning, the moors stretched out, calm and untouched, bathed in a delicate mist that hung softly over rolling hills of deep green and muted purple heather. The recent struggles felt distant now, softened by the comforting, rhythmic patterns of daily life. Grace sat at the farmhouse table, her fingers tracing slowly over the polished, worn wood, each groove and scratch carrying stories of her family, stories of resilience and stubborn perseverance. She thought about her late husband, imagined his presence sitting quietly opposite her, eyes crinkled gently in a proud smile. How he would have loved to see their home still standing, still theirs. She smiled softly to herself, rising slowly and stepping out onto the porch to watch Ethan playing quietly in the fields. His laughter rang out bright and clear, a joyful melody carried gently by the breeze. Bess bounded happily beside him, tail wagging furiously as they chased sheep playfully through the pastures. Grace leaned against the railing, lost briefly in thought. It struck her, deeply and profoundly, that this struggle hadn't merely been about their farm, their sheep, or even Lawson's greed. It was a story about roots, deep and unyielding roots, tangled beneath the soil, binding them fiercely to this place. The moors weren't simply earth and grass. They were living history, a silent witness to generations of sweat, blood, and quiet determination. Movement at the corner of her eye caught her attention, and she turned to see Lee approaching slowly from his repaired caravan, holding 2 steaming mugs of tea. He stepped up onto the porch, offering one quietly to her. She accepted gratefully, sipping slowly as they stood side by side, watching Ethan's playful joy. "You know," Lee began softly, his voice thoughtful, "when I first came here, I thought I was running away from something. The world, my past, myself maybe. But turns out, I was really running toward something." Grace glanced at him gently, curious. "And what was that?" He looked thoughtfully over the hills. A quiet contentment settled deep within him. "Purpose. Belonging. I spent years fighting wars I hardly understood, lost in battles that took more than they ever gave. But here, fighting beside all of you, standing up for something real, this felt different. It felt like coming home." Grace smiled softly, understanding deeply what he meant. "That's exactly it. This place, it teaches you who you are, shows you clearly what truly matters. Lawson was just a symptom, a reminder that greed and selfishness will always exist. But so will strength, community, and the courage to defend what's precious." Lee nodded, his gaze distant but peaceful. "I've learned more here on these moors about strength and courage than I ever did in combat." Below them, Ethan noticed them watching and waved exuberantly, calling out with a cheerful voice, "Mom! Lee! Come see what Bess found!" They exchanged a warm glance, descending the porch steps and crossing the fields together. Ethan knelt excitedly by Bess, who wagged her tail proudly, sitting obediently next to something hidden beneath the grass. "What is it, love?" Grace asked, kneeling beside him. Ethan's eyes sparkled brightly. "Look, a baby bird. Fell from its nest, but Bess saved it. Can we help it?" Lee smiled quietly, gently picking up the tiny creature. "Of course we can, lad. We'll look after it until it's ready to fly again." As Ethan ran ahead toward the cottage, Grace lingered, watching him thoughtfully. "This isn't just a yarn about a boy and his dog, is it?" she murmured softly. Lee glanced at her gently. "No, it's about people. About standing up for something you believe in, even when it's tough." Grace nodded slowly, eyes serious and clear. Lawson's kind will always pop up. People thinking progress means tearing down everything valuable. But for every Lawson, there'll always be those who stand up, quietly determined to protect what matters. Lee's expression softened warmly. "Like you," she smiled gently. "Like us. The quiet ones. The fighters. People holding communities together. That's the real strength. The kind that quietly endures, rooted deep and strong beneath the surface." They walked back slowly to the cottage, the quiet peace around them profound and reassuring. Inside, Ethan prepared a small, cozy nest for the rescued bird, his movements gentle, careful, and filled with compassion. Bess watched protectively, eyes bright and attentive. Grace watched her son thoughtfully, feeling a profound swell of pride. She understood deeply what this entire ordeal had truly taught them. It had shown them vividly the value of unity, the power of quiet resilience, and the unyielding strength found only in deeply held beliefs. These weren't simply lessons to remember. They were truths to live by, fiercely and courageously. That evening, as twilight fell gently across the moors, the community gathered quietly at the village pub. Friends, neighbors, allies. They raised their glasses together, toasting quietly but fiercely to their victory and the future. Tommy stood proudly among his bikers, Rachel quietly sharing updates about the conservation efforts, Inspector Patel laughing warmly, enjoying rare relaxation among people who deeply respected her fairness. Ethan sat happily beside Lee, listening intently as he spoke softly about plans for a riding school, how it would bring new life and opportunity to the village youth. As Grace looked quietly around the room, she felt deeply grateful for these people, ordinary, yet extraordinary. They were the lifeblood of the community, the real heroes who stepped forward when most needed. They'd reminded her, vividly, that community was never truly lost, merely waiting quietly beneath the surface, ready to rise again when called. Grace stood, her voice clear and steady, eyes shining with emotion. "Tonight, we celebrate. Not just victory, but strength. This place, these moors, they're part of us all. And this struggle taught us clearly what matters most: community, courage, and standing firm for what's right." The villagers cheered warmly, raising glasses in heartfelt unity. Ethan grinned proudly, leaning into Lee's reassuring presence. Bess lay comfortably by his feet, tail thumping gently. Grace raised her glass once more, her voice strong and passionate. "What's your moor? What would you fight for, bleed for? That's the lesson from all of this. Find it, protect it fiercely, because it matters." As applause filled the cozy pub, laughter and warmth wrapping around them, Grace knew deeply that they'd emerged stronger, bound closer than ever. They'd faced the storms head-on, unflinching, and had learned invaluable lessons along the way. Outside, beneath the peaceful, starry sky, the moors stretched silently, ever watchful, ever patient, quietly waiting for whatever might come next, safe in the knowledge that its people, strong and united, would always stand ready to defend it. As seasons turned gently on the North York moors, life settled once more into a steady rhythm, one marked by hard work, quiet determination, and the comforting embrace of routine. Autumn arrived gradually, painting the landscape in brilliant golds and rich crimsons, leaves tumbling lazily onto fields that stretched quietly beneath wide skies. The Carter farm flourished again, healthier and stronger than ever. Grace and Ethan stood firm, working side by side with Lee, who had truly become part of their family. Each morning brought quiet purpose, each evening a sense of peaceful accomplishment. The scars from the struggles remained, a gentle, ever-present reminder of battles fought and lessons learned. The Moorland Sheep Conservation Fund flourished, its success driven by community dedication and Rachel Evans's tireless passion. The pub became a lively hub for gatherings, stories, and continued activism, ensuring that the moors and their unique wildlife stayed protected long-term. Inspector Patel became a trusted ally and frequent visitor, welcomed warmly into village life. Her vigilant presence a comforting reassurance that justice remained firmly in capable hands. Yet amidst the calm routine, small changes occurred that hinted warmly at new beginnings. Lee repaired and repainted his old caravan, moving it closer to the Carter farmhouse, creating a modest but comfortable home base for himself. He spent countless hours patiently teaching village children how to ride, sharing stories from his past that gently inspired quiet courage and resilience. Ethan eagerly embraced each day, growing stronger and wiser, his heart filled with fierce pride for the land they'd fought to protect. Bess remained loyally by his side, her attentive eyes watching over him, protecting him in her own quiet, devoted way. One crisp, clear afternoon, the community gathered again on the moors, a simple, heartfelt celebration of their shared victory and the quiet resilience that bound them firmly together. A bonfire crackled warmly in the open air, flames flickering upward against the darkening sky, laughter and cheerful conversations mingling gently with the crackling wood. Tommy stood proudly beside his moors bikers, smiling broadly as he watched villagers young and old gather warmly around the fire. Rachel chatted happily with Inspector Patel, sharing hopeful plans for the Conservation Fund. Ethan and his friends raced playfully through the grass, joyful shouts carrying clearly across the fields. Grace watched quietly from a slight distance, heart swelling warmly with emotion. She felt Lee approach, his calm presence reassuring beside her. They stood quietly together, savoring the peaceful moment. "We made it," she murmured softly, voice gentle but resolute. Lee nodded slowly, eyes reflecting the fire's warm glow. "We did. It feels good, real, true victory." She smiled softly, glancing warmly toward Ethan's joyful laughter echoing across the moors. "It's a victory worth protecting, always." Lee glanced toward her, expression thoughtful. "Funny thing about peace, it never lasts unless you're always ready to defend it." She met his gaze steadily, understanding clearly. "I know, but we'll always be ready." As twilight deepened slowly across the moors, villagers raised glasses high, voices clear and heartfelt as they toasted warmly to community, to friendship, and to their beloved home. Ethan rushed excitedly to Grace and Lee, Bess trotting closely behind, tail wagging joyfully. "Come quick. Tommy's telling stories about how he chased off Lawson's thugs. Laughing softly, Grace allowed Ethan to tug her gently toward the firelight, Lee following close behind, a quiet smile on his face. They joined the circle gathered around Tommy, who recounted their adventures with colorful enthusiasm. Each exaggerated detail met warmly by laughter and cheers from his eager audience. Eventually, Grace stood, her voice calm and steady, drawing the villagers' quiet attention. "I just wanted to thank you all," she began softly, eyes shining warmly in the firelight. "Each of you stood firm when it counted most. We saved our home, not just for ourselves, but for the generations coming after us." She paused briefly, eyes finding Ethan's face among the crowd, her voice softening warmly. "We protected our future." Warm applause echoed gently through the gathering, accompanied by cheerful whistles and heartfelt cheers. Ethan blushed shyly but smiled proudly, hugging Bess affectionately. Grace raised her glass high, voice clear and firm. "So here's to us, the quiet ones, the fighters. May we always stand ready, strong and united. The moors are ours to protect, forever." The villagers raised their glasses warmly, voices mingling together in heartfelt unity. Ethan leaned gently against Lee, contentment clear in his young eyes. Later, as stars glittered brilliantly above, villagers gradually dispersed, their spirits buoyed by friendship, warmth, and hope. Grace and Lee watched quietly as Ethan, tired but happy, slowly drifted off to sleep beside the fire, Bess curled closely beside him. "Feels right, doesn't it?" Lee murmured softly, eyes gentle. Grace smiled warmly, nodding, like everything finally settled into place. He glanced thoughtfully across the quiet moors. "It's home." Grace met his gaze softly. "Yes, it is." Long after the fire dimmed gently to glowing embers, Grace and Lee lingered quietly, savoring the deep silence, feeling profoundly connected to each other, to the community, to the land itself. Grace breathed deeply, voice quiet but clear. "I can't thank you enough, Lee, for everything." He smiled gently, eyes warm and sincere. "You never needed to. Protecting this place, standing beside you and Ethan, it was my privilege." She nodded warmly, deeply moved. "Then we keep standing, together." Lee inclined his head respectfully, resolve firm and clear in his gaze. "Always." As they finally walked slowly back toward home, Ethan safe and secure in Lee's strong arms, Grace took a lingering look over her shoulder. The moors lay peaceful beneath the moonlight, timeless and resilient, silent guardians of countless stories, struggles, and quiet triumphs. Life had settled into quiet normalcy once more, the struggles now merely memories. Yet those memories mattered deeply, quiet reminders of strength found in unity, courage revealed in hardship, and the enduring power of home. Grace closed her eyes briefly, savoring the quiet truth she'd learned through it all, that the most meaningful victories weren't won through battles alone, but through quiet resilience, fierce determination, and unwavering belief in protecting what mattered most. As she stepped into her cottage, warmth enveloped her softly, bringing quiet comfort. Ethan stirred gently in Lee's careful embrace, murmuring softly before settling peacefully back into dreams. Bess trotted contentedly behind, tail gently wagging. Grace smiled softly, profoundly grateful. The fires they'd faced had tested them deeply, forged unbreakable bonds, taught invaluable lessons. They'd emerged stronger, wiser, forever changed, but home remained, steady and true. It was gritty, real, and undeniably theirs, their quiet, powerful triumph. Grace gently shut the cottage door behind them, heart settled, peaceful, and content. ready to face whatever future storms might come, knowing they'd always stand together, united, strong, and unyielding as the land itself. Their story, rooted deeply in strength, resilience, and quiet courage, would continue. And out across the moors, beneath vast, starry skies, the wind whispered softly, carrying their tale onward, a quiet, powerful song of home, community, and fierce love worth fighting for.